You're listening to Proven Perspectives, a podcast with John Hawkins, the founder of Leadership Edge. I'm Laura, John's daughter, and in each episode, we'll explore a topic related to life, leadership, or mentoring. Through over 50 years of faith in Christ, John has learned proven life and leadership perspectives that will equip listeners for a lifestyle of leadership in their marriages, families, careers, communities, and churches. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Laura, it is great to hear your voice. How are you today?
I'm doing good. We're just kind of trucking along on a Thursday. How's your Thursday going?
Oh, it is going pretty wonderful, but I will say to our listeners, our downstairs of our home is just a war zone right now. The kitchen has been completely ripped out. The downstairs bathroom is ripped out, and we have these wonderful, very excellent workers who are real noisy and who have been singing songs in their national language, which I don't even know what it is. So the listeners may hear a little bit of background noise on today's recording that sounds a little strange for us, but it is a group of guys that are doing a great remodeling job for us downstairs.
That's awesome. So if you hear singing, it's coming from your house. And if you hear screaming, it's coming from my house. Okay. Well, good. Well, so Dad, I know that this episode is going to be dropping on April 1st, 2023, and that marks a big day for you. So tell us about it.
Well, first of all, what I'm getting ready to say is not an April Fool's joke. So this is really the truth, and we're not trying to pull any tricks. But yeah, April of 2024, so a year from now, will be my last month of full-time employment at Leadership Edge. I'll be hitting 70 in April of 2024, and we have felt that at that point it would be good for me to step away a little bit. So I will continue on after that at 2 days a week, working somewhat as a consultant to Todd Melby, our president, and then continuing to develop content. And you and I'll continue to do the podcast. And then Janet, my wife, who works with Leadership Edge, she'll be retiring completely. She will be completely stepping away from Leadership Edge in April of 2024. So this year, April 1st of 2023, is the countdown to retirement for us. And we are
wild.
Really, really excited about
it. Yeah, no, that is. It's amazing to think about and also like kind of interesting to imagine, like, I wonder what you guys' day-to-day will look like. So it'll be fun to see. And I mean, you know, as I'm thinking about like you guys retiring, I'm kind of imagining like what I might feel, but I know you and I are different people. So what's it like? What does it mean to you to be 1 year out?
Yeah, well, you know, as I look forward to retirement and really to this year, kind of getting ready for retirement, I think a lot about, you know, kind of the, legacy kind of things. And then, you know, that my role will be changing. It's been, 5 years now that Todd's been president. So I stepped away from being president of Leadership Edge, but I've been, the founder and have been in still a central role in the day-to-day operations of Leadership Edge. And so, when you're stepping away from that, especially if you're a guy, you can have all kind of feelings. Like you can, I think for some men, you can feel that you've lost the biggest part of your life, or that you can almost like go through an identity crisis of, well, who am I if I'm not, at the center of this organization that I helped start? But I read some words from a Christian author named John Bloom they've really helped me. And I'm going to read this quote. He says, "When the blessed Lord grants one a role to play, one must perform it faithfully, but never grasp it. For the Lord also takes away. The role is not the reward. The Lord is the reward."
That's really good.
We must remember that our role is not our reward. Jesus is our reward. Roles will begin and they will end. And the only way for us to end well is if in our heart Jesus has increased and we have decreased. Now, I want to read that last line one more time. And the only way for us to end well is if in our hearts, and I think you would also say, and in our minds and in our actions, Jesus has increased and we have decreased.
That's good.
And so that's really helps me as I'm moving towards retirement and moving away from being kind of at the center of things with Leadership Edge, that the reward I've had all these years and I'll have forever, and that is Jesus himself. And so, yeah, my role at Leadership Edge is going to change, but I'm good. And so I wrote a little thing a few years ago called "The Role Is Not the Reward."
We did a podcast on that, right?
Yeah, I think we did. And a couple of reminders from that is, the roles we play, they're granted to us from God. They're a gift to us. And we do need to perform our roles, as John Bloom said, we need to perform them faithfully. But again, as Bloom says, but the role isn't the reward. It never was, it never will be. Jesus is. And as in all things, Christ is our example to follow in understanding our role. We just see the humility that he had when in Philippians it says that he did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself and taking the form of a servant. And that's the kind of leader he is for us. And that reminds me of the kind of leader and person he wants me to be as I'm moving to retirement. And that quote, I'll read it in full from Philippians. It says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." So as I think about retirement, as I think about walking away from being at the center of this organization, that's what I hope, that I'll have that mind, and that I won't be grasping, trying to hold on to things that now it's time for me to let go, or I won't be regretting, but I will, be obediently and wholeheartedly walking towards the things that God has for me now. I think that the whole idea of Jesus being my reward is just key to me at this moment. And I think another thing that makes retirement really, really pretty wonderful for me is our president, Todd Melvin.
Yeah.
He is just a good and godly and humble man. He is a very skilled and wise leader. And he is leading our organization well. And our organization is in a better place than it's ever been. And I think providing better services than ever. And so it makes it easy to walk away when the new leadership is of the sort that Todd is, and the rest of our staff, and are leading in the way that they are.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can see how that would make it like the future exciting, to kind of think about the future of Leadership Edge instead of feeling sad. So, and I know this isn't like the big focus of the episode today, but a quick question that I had for you with what you were saying, like with the John Bloom thing about the only way to finish well is, and I think that's like that John 3:30, like he must increase and I must decrease.
Yes.
So I guess in a few sentences, like, how has God done that in you over decades? Like, how has that happened that you're kind of in that place? Is it a choice? I mean, I guess certainly part of it must be a choice, but like, how has that happened in you?
I guess the answer would be miraculously. Just in that, when we come to faith in different ways, we're so full of ourselves. We're so in our own heads and in our ways and thoughts. And surely the way I think about everything is right. And yet, when I first became a Christian, when I was 16, I learned Galatians 2:20. It says, I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. And there's just this beautiful kind of dance or interchange there about who's alive and who's dead. You know, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives. But then the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. So I think this thing about Christ growing greater and me growing less is just Galatians 2:20 becoming more and more actualized in my heart and mind and soul, that I must die, and that as I live, I must live in faith and dependence upon him. Does that make sense, Lauren? Is that relevant to your question?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and so I know, I mean, one of the obvious questions is like, so what's next? Like, what's your focus now over this next year? And what will it look like as you move to retirement?
Well, my focus now really is, I think, in the phrase finishing well, finishing well, finishing faithfully, and finishing in a way that encourages the next generation. I'm I'm 69 almost, so I'm close to 70. And so for me, the next generation, are younger people in their 60s and 50s and 40s, 30s, 20s, all the way down. And I hope to cheer them on. I hope that in how I believe and how I live in these years of my life, that somehow that will cheer them on and that will just give them reason to believe. It's interesting. We haven't even really talked about this, but, on Sunday, I spent a few hours with Barrett.
Yeah.
And that's Laura's son, Barrett. And we had a great time. And, we went to a garden store and looked at plants. We walked around the park. He wanted to take me to Starbucks for coffee. And so we went to Starbucks. And, there was nothing particular big about the time. I did ask him, I said, so how's it going being Barrett these days? How are you doing? And how are you doing relating to your mom and your dad and your your sisters? And he didn't say much. I mean, he engaged. But then, you texted me later that day and you said, not sure what you and Barrett did, but he spent some of the afternoon reading the Bible after we were together.
Which isn't like his normal afternoon activity. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just thought, I don't know if those two things are correlated or not, but to the degree that Barrett and me spending time together is somehow correlated to him wanting to come home and reading the Bible, I just thought that's exactly what I hope.
Yeah.
Is that somehow with those that I'm a part of these days, that my life will encourage them towards it. And like with Barrett, it doesn't always have to be like long theological discussions, or maybe it will never be long theological discussions. But I think that the people after a while get a sense of what you're about and what's deepest in your heart. And I hope that in these days of my life, that it is true that what I'm about is Him, is Christ, and that is a blessing and flows into the lives of others. So I do think a lot about finishing well, and there's a couple of verses that have become really precious to me. One is Psalm 92, verses 12 through 14. It says, the righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. And then it says, they still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green. And then it says, to what end? And it says, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. So that's one of the things I'm focused on, is that somehow God would work in me in a way to where the message that comes through to others from my life is the Lord is upright. He has been my rock all the years of my life, and there's no unrighteousness in him. That I would be a faithful witness in these times. And then Psalm 71 says, so even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me. And then he says, until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come. Your righteousness, O God, reaches the high heavens. You who have done great things, O God, who is like you. So that's what I'm focused on. As Charles Spurgeon said, every aged Christian is to be a letter of commendation to the immutable fidelity, and that would be like trustworthiness of Jehovah. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. So my hope is that I'll finish well, and that the message of my life will be of that sort, a faithful witness to him.
Yeah, no, that's really neat. And also, as you were talking, we should mention there's also another show note that we'll be including called To Declare That the Lord is Upright, right? And were you just pulling verses from that? So that's...
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was. And for our listeners, if you look at that show note, it will say that, well, I'm sorry, the first one, the role is not the reward. It will say that I've just reached my 65th birthday. And what you need to know with that one is that I wrote it 4 years ago. So, yeah, but we'll have two different show notes for listeners.
Yeah. Well, and the only other thing I had to say with that one is, Dad, I'm just so thankful for you guys being out here and both the blessing that it is to me and also my entire family. And I know other people around us as well, but it is like such a gift to have you investing and being so intentional. And yeah, I'm really thankful.
Well, it's a treasure. And really, it's a testimony to God that he would work in my life to where I could be a blessing to your family, because when I came to him, I was very challenged, and he has done amazing things in and through me, and I just bless him for that.
Yeah. Well, and for someone who is maybe like younger and thinks, man, that's like the person I'm wanting to become, like, what are the things, is there anything to do now? Or, I mean, it sounds like some of what you're saying is it's the ongoing sanctification process as we like truly walk with God. But I guess, are there like the thing about what you're really about comes through over time and impacts people? Like, any thoughts on that?
Well, I've had this thought that, how do you describe this? That doesn't sound ridiculous. Imagine you have just a wonderful German sausage. And
okay.
So one end of it is your 20s, and one end of it is your 80s.
Okay.
And I've thought through the years, I want it to all taste the same. To where whether somebody takes a cut out of the sausage in my 20s or they take a cut out of my 30s or 40s or my 70s, that it would be the same. And hopefully it's improved through the years, but that I've been on the same path, now for 52 years. And so I think that for those who are younger, you are younger, but you're on the course, you're on the path. And, my hope for you would be that the experience that someone would have of you in this year of your life would be of the same nature of 10 years ago and 50 years from now. And again, not that it doesn't improve and grow better, but it's the same man or woman on the same path of being God's man or woman in all the spheres of life that they're in. And it looks different in your 20s than it does in your 60s. But if you're a Christian, the core is always the same. It is always the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Well, and that also kind of reminds me of, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, but something you said where basically something along the lines of like, we become who we become decision by decision, which that's something I've been talking about with my kids a lot. But yeah, like kind of the idea that 10 years ago and 50 years from now, like the same person making the same kind of like God honoring. No, that's helpful, Dad. Thanks.
Yeah. I think that we long for integrity. We long that there is an integratedness of the gospel throughout every bit of our lives. I remember one time attending a funeral of a man who passed away, and the people who hadn't been part of his family just spoke so glowingly of this man. And yet the members of his family had suffered through so much of the dark and hidden parts of who this man really was. And I remember at that funeral thinking, John, don't think that couldn't be your story.
Yeah.
But, trust God that all the way through, by his grace, you'll be the same man. And that is what I hope.
Yeah, that's good.
And there are a lot of things I'm looking forward to.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you about.
Yeah.
So what are you looking forward to?
Well, it's funny. I think with anybody who's about to retire, they have all these things about, man, I can't wait to do this, this, and this. And then I've been
Pick up surfing.
around a few, I've been around a few retirees, and they're like, that wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. But I think I will enjoy being a bit less busy. My first work meeting began at 7:30 this morning, and it's 3, and I've hardly left my office chair this whole day. And again, not complaining. I love the work I get to do, but I think it will be good to be just a little less busy. I think I'll enjoy that. I think that, to have a little more flexibility to be with the kids and grandkids. With me working full time, I'm not quite as flexible as maybe I would like to be. So I think some flexibility there. I think, trying out some new and different venues in which to serve. Both thinking at our church, at Seabreeze Church, new and different ways I can serve there. And then there's a wonderful food ministry here called Bracken's Kitchen. And I volunteered once there already, but just thinking of ways I can volunteer at Bracken's Kitchen. And so it's still service, but it's kind of something different. I've done Leadership Edge for 30 years, and it's been wonderful, but it is interesting to think about doing something different, even though I'd, still be at Leadership Edge a couple of days a week. So I think some different new ways to be of service, but, to get to that 2 days a week. But I also really look forward to being of support to Todd, our president, that I'll be somewhat like a consultant or a special assistant to him.
Yeah.
And I'll still be developing content. So that sounds fun. Another thing I put down was that I'll have more time to cook.
Excellent.
And cook hopefully really good meals for people I love and not be rushed. And so, part of this remodeling is getting our kitchen redone. And then I think Janet and I are looking forward to some, day trips. We're still relatively new to California. And so there's some museums and like the Reagan Library and some different things that we'd love to do some day trips on. So that's good. And then just every day walking with the Lord and living by his grace, living out faith and faithfulness. So those are the things I imagine now. And maybe if we do a follow-up on this in 3 or 4 years, we'll see how it really turned out.
I know. I am excited and curious to see, I think it'll all be good, and it'll be cool to see what it actually is. So that's neat.
Yeah.
Well, so Dad, as we, I guess one thing I was thinking about, as we're kind of moving towards wrapping up. So you're kind of talking about the end of this era with your job. And I was thinking, with some of our listeners, maybe a generation or more younger, maybe it's, the end of a time where they lived in one place and they're moving somewhere else, or a kid is launching from high school. I was thinking how maybe last week you and I were exchanging messages about a different John Bloom quote where he was talking about Ecclesiastes 7 and that verse that talks about the day of death being better than the day of birth, and how his point was that our endings reveal where our hope really was. And so if we're watching our endings, then that shows a lot about where our hearts are at. And so, I mean, with those scenarios that I gave for, like other kinds of endings, or for Adam and I, one thing that we've been talking a lot about is, as you know, we're moving towards the end of foster care placement. And it's probably a couple months away, but just kind of starting to think through, okay, how do we do this with our faith really in God, where, our ending reveals to God, and hopefully as our kids are watching, that our hope really is in Christ. And so I guess, like, what advice do you have in that specific situation, or maybe even more generally, what's the message for those of us who are further away from retirement?
Well, that's a good question, and probably could be answered, multiple ways. I think that the Lord willing, with each of our listeners, his goal, unless he has other plans for you, is that one day you'll be almost 69, and one day you'll be at retirement or nearing retirement.
Mm-hmm.
For some, maybe they won't live that long. For others, maybe has different plans. But generally speaking, where I'm at is where God is bringing, most, perhaps all of our listeners. And I think that it's like, if you want to be faithful at the end, you have to learn to be faithful along the way, and trusting him along the way. So when you're in your 20s and you're really focused on training and your own development, you're hopefully focused on all these things you've said about Jesus actually becoming convictions that you base your life around, then it's important, because what you are in your 20s leads to what you're going to be in your 30s. And in your 30s, you'll begin your go-go years, where with many, marriage and kids and careers and all kinds of things going on, just a busy season of life. And there's a lot of faithful endurance and dependence upon God that is required for your 30s. And a lot of that is to help you get through your 40s, because your 40s are even more intense for most people in terms of just busyness and pressure, and learning to depend upon him, learning to trust him, learning to just commit yourself to him and walk with him each day amid a very busy schedule. Because, your 40s lead into your 50s. And we've said on this podcast a number of times that my thought is that, generally speaking, your years from 50 to 70 are your years of greatest service and influence. But that doesn't happen if you haven't been building up towards that, if that's not been a part of your life beforehand. And then I think 70 plus is finishing well and being a faithful witness to those younger than you of God. But I think that the answer is, wherever you're at in the decades of your life, now is the time to learn faith and faithfulness. And I think that, for you and Adam, but really for all of us, you and Adam and your children, and for Janet and me, the thought that the foster baby that you've had, that in some ways we've all had for almost a year now, may be placed somewhere else, and we will see that period come to an end. I think it is a sense of how do we all finish well with that, and especially how do we finish with our trust firmly in God.
Yeah.
To where, even though it may be a heartbreaking thing to let go of this little one, we do it with great confidence in God and in who he is, and in how he hears our prayers for this little one. So I think the answer is, wherever you're at in the decades, now's the time to trust him. To live for him, to be a servant to others, because that's helps you to be able to be that when you're my age. Yeah. And it honors God.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is good. This is a really helpful episode. I think, like, my takeaway is just, like, kind of when you are talking about that, generally who we were 10 years ago and who we are, 20 years from now, like, the core being the same. And so both, like, relying on God and trusting that he is going to help us with that. And then also really just being intentional. So yeah, this is an encouraging episode for me. Dad, any final thoughts from you?
No, I just appreciate the listeners being with us today. I hope that this has been of some encouragement to you. We will have a couple of different show notes that you can download and see as a resource. And my last encouragement is just wherever you're at and whatever years of life you're in, now's the time to trust him. Now's the time to believe that everything he says in his word that he will do for us, that he really will do it. And we can lean into that and follow him. So listeners, we're glad you're with us. If we can be of other help, you can go to our website, Leadership Edge Incorporated. It's lead-edge.com. And Laura, I'll throw it back to you to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dad. And thanks, listeners, for joining us.
Listeners, if you would like more perspectives on life, leadership, and mentoring, please go to the Leadership Edge website at lead-edge.com. Or if you have questions or ideas about future podcasts, please reach out to us at lei@lead-edge.com. We look forward to hearing from you.